How's it going, people? Salmon Slabber here, and this is my RuneScape theory series, I guess. It's a bit different from the normal videos I chuck you, which is typically guides, live com, stuff I've been up to, and maybe a bit of a boss run now and then. This is kind of like a series that'll be talking about theoretical things that could potentially be within RuneScape, but aren't at all. Or at least are in a very small fashion. Basically stuff I've kind of talked about with mates on Skype, people in game and stuff like that, and it's just random banter bit pretty much, but some of it actually kind of worked out quite well in my mind, I thought, so I figured I'd share some of this with you and see what you guys think, and if you would like it, or if you've got anything to add to it, what you think could even make it that much better. And maybe eventually, if the ideas get good enough and fleshed out enough, maybe chuck it over to the RuneScape forums as a potential update, which I think would be pretty interesting. So yeah, to start off with, this one is about notorious monsters. So, what I mean by notorious monsters, they haven't actually had them in RuneScape as such, although there is one sort of example I can give you that's in RuneScape at the moment. But these I found are in other MMOs and other RPGs and stuff that I've actually played, and I think it worked pretty well within RuneScape at the moment. So let's go on with it. So as it is at the moment, the only way you can get weapons, armors, special items or something along those lines is by killing monsters, whether they're bosses, whether you have to do a minigame for it, or otherwise. Which, by most standards, and pretty much generally every single MMO that's available at the moment, is a standard practice now. And is kind of the staple go-to thing that every single game pretty much uses. So with that said, what the hell do I mean by a notorious monster? What is a notorious monster? Well, notorious monsters would be kind of similar to bossing in some respects, but it'd run under a completely different mechanic. Rather than you just go into a room, poof, there's a boss there, let's stab it. It'll be slightly different to that, and it would add quite an amazing amount of variety to the world of RuneScape, and will actually bring people out of the normal areas, so places you typically don't see anyone, such as the Mauritania swamps, for example, into the desert, maybe. But yeah. So, what are notorious monsters exactly? Well, I'll try and explain this as cleanly and simply as possible, so it's nice and easy to understand, hopefully. But right now in RuneScape there's a lot of different type of monsters, and they're all different levels. They're also in a lot of different areas. Although these days most of those monsters in most areas aren't really paid any attention at all. But why is that? Is it the fact that it's in a hard to reach area, or just really far out of the way, or far from a bank? Are they too hard to kill, or simply just not worth the effort due to shitty drops? Or are there simply just better alternatives altogether? Well, what I would hope notorious monsters would do is add a bit more life to all of these old unused areas and monsters. Additionally, add an entirely new and diverse, kind of like the distractions, the diversions and distractions you're going to give in a moment, similar to those, but not quite. So what do I actually mean by these wonderful notorious monsters? Well, the basic concept is that a notorious monster, or NM, is a boss of sorts, or kind of like a leader of a species of mob or enemy monster, whichever you want to call them. So, to give a little example of this, if you were to go stab some goblins just outside Lumbridge, for example, and you're stabbing away happily, and you've killed, let's say, 500 of them, for whatever reason you want to stab goblins for that long, well, eventually they have a chance of spawning an NM, or notorious monster, and it might be like a high priest goblin. It'll just pop up out of nowhere and start to rape you. Well, the NM would be a stronger version than your typical monster, and let's say, for example, the enemy is level 5. Well, the NM would be something like level 10. So it's a lot stronger than the mobs you're typically killing at the moment, but it should just about be soloable for those people at that NM's level. So for example, if you're level 10, you should be able to solo it with fairly well, although you would be needing quite a lot of food, for example. So making it fairly strong is the idea. It's kind of like a boss monster of those enemies you're killing. So that's pretty much the goblin example. So basically this big chunky evil goblin would be bigger, scarier and higher level than regular goblins. So it's a bit more interesting, it'll add a bit more variety. And they would also drop some unique items, let's say. But I'll get into that a bit later, I think, as it's kind of easier to split all this up. So, to make things even more interesting, normally when you hover over an enemy, you'll have the enemy's name and their level. Well, instead of having their level show, it would be something like High Goblin Priest, and next to the level would just be question marks. So no one would know what level these NMs are, but after a while, obviously killing them, you'll get a general idea of what level-ish they are. But to start off with, no one knows. On top of that, it would have a hell of a lot more life, so even if it is level 10, and it's got the same stats as like a level 10 goblin, for example, if you just threw that at someone, even if they was like level 5, as long as they had maybe 2-3 pieces of food, they'd be able to kill it and just walk away. So to make it a lot more harder, kind of make it a proper boss, is adding quite a fair chunk of health to it. So his damage would be the same as a level 10 goblin, so if you are a lower level, that's fair enough, you should be able to survive it, but his health would be quite massive, so it would take you a long time to kill it, which is where having food on you makes it that much more important, and I think that would make it a hell of a lot more fun to try and do. Additionally, to add a bit more power to it, because if he was at level 10, it still wouldn't be all that hard. It would just be like fighting 10 goblins at once, let's say. You're going to increase its defense a little bit. So his accuracy would be the same as a normal goblin. Maybe slightly higher, since it is technically a boss. But its defense would be higher, so it would be harder to hit. Which I think would make it awesome. Although it will need fine-tuning, obviously, but still, you get the idea. So, what does this mean for RuneScape in general? Well, I've given you the goblin example, so you kind of get the idea now, hopefully. Well, these NMs could be added across the entirety of RuneScape. This system does actually kind of exist within RuneScape at the moment, and for those of you who can't really picture it, well, if you head on over to the Warriors Guild up in Burthorpe, you'll find the Cyclops at the very top of the tower, and for those of you who have actually got Dragon Defenders, you'll know about the Uber Boss Cyclops. Well, the general idea on him is after you've killed a certain amount of Cyclops, or kind of like a random chance, similar to how drops work, I guess, eventually this big massive version of the Cyclops around you will appear. It's not massively stronger than the normal ones, but it's stronger nonetheless, and that's how you get those special items. It would kind of work like that, but in this case I kind of want the new like boss mob to be quite a lot harder, so it's actually worth fighting kind of thing. So that's pretty much the difference. It'd be a massive stronger version of the Cyclops, but the Cyclops is a pretty good description of what I want to do, except for there'd be some variations to it, so it's not just you kill a certain amount and one will randomly appear in front of you at random times. So I wouldn't really want it so you could just walk in, kill myth drags, and then you kill one and then poof, massive boss myth drag. I kind of want it spread out a little bit, and maybe change things up with other versions that got better drops, for example. I'll go into that in a bit, but yeah. But the main thing about this is the fact that these Notorious monsters can be added everywhere, and for every species or type of monster within RuneScape. So you could have a boss shade, you could have a boss goblin. Of course, most of these would have different spawning times, rates, methods altogether. So, for example, you could go kill goblins in Lumbridge, and maybe it only requires 200 kills. But then maybe you go to Bronze Dragons, and maybe they take 700 kills. Or maybe you go to Bandos, and maybe it takes 1,000 kills, or something like that. You know what I mean. You get the general idea. Which will actually make some Notorious monsters rarer than others, and the idea behind that is, the rarer they are, the more like quirky an item drop they can have. So it might not necessarily be the greatest weapon in the game, like almighty godly powerful, like a Drygore plus 20 or something. Instead of it being like that, it might be as strong as, let's say, a CLS. but this CLS will have a special effect to it, such as it inflicts poison or regen. Each time you hit, you gain a little bit of life. Yeah, you get the idea? Kind of like little small things like that, just to make them that little bit more desirable. But it'll also, well, doing this, I think, will actually even out the amount of effort or time required to get the NMs or make NM hunting worth it. So basically, what I mean is, if you take the lower levels, for the Goblin example again, I'm going to go back to them. If you can one-shot kill 1,000 Goblins a hell of a lot quicker than it'll take you to kill 500 Steel Dragons. Yeah? So, obviously Goblins, you'd want a fairly high kill count to get if the item is any use, or you'd want it low just so new players and stuff could run into it and be like, oh my god, what the hell is this? I mean, if you've seen that when you first joined the game, or even halfway through the game, it would be pretty awesome. You're just randomly killing stuff on your Slayer task, and then one of these mega bosses appear and you get some awesome item in a drop. I mean, come on, it does sound pretty awesome, and I think it would make a great addition. Keeping in mind though, these NMs, their numbers won't be set just to you. What I mean by that is, their servers won't keep a ratio of how many of X you've killed like Slayer does, although you could do that in some cases, I suppose. But what I mean is, you could kill, let's say, 76 Steel Dragons on a task, and then someone else could come along and they kill 54, and then someone else comes along, they kill 60, etc, etc, until eventually it hits that sweet spot where the person goes on to their Slayer task, they kill 10, and on the 11th one, the mega boss spawns. That's kind of what I mean, so it's not necessarily just keeping your ratio, although some of the NMs may do. But yeah, it's all part of the theory at the moment, but it all is up in the air. I mean, you could variate this a hell of a lot. And talking about the various ways of how to actually get these NMs to spawn, I thought of a couple, although there is plenty more, but these are the ones I've kind of fleshed out a bit and kind of made a bit more sense with. So the obvious one is what I've just been talking about in the examples, is what I'm going to call kill spawning. So it's going to be the basic NM spawning ability. You simply kill mobs of the same species within a certain area. So for example, killing 4,000 goblins outside of Lumpy will spawn a Goblin Uber Shaman of Deathbringing, level 20 or something. But then that super goblin may have the ability to attack similar to the goblin boss in the low level dungeoneering area. So that little goblin mage where you can't really use prayer and stuff and likes to teleport around and snare you. You might have special little abilities like that. Same with the rest of the monsters, you could always add some quirky stuff to it. But say you can kill all of these goblins in Lumbridge, you might not necessarily find that there's a Notorious monster in the Goblin Village. So you could kill 1,000 goblins in Goblin Village, but maybe one won't spawn there. So it's not necessarily just going to be every single species in every single area is definitely going to have an NM there. It's only going to work in certain sections or certain areas of the game. Now at this point you're probably thinking, what the fuck, Salmon, if we don't even know where the NMs spawn or appear, how the hell are we ever going to find them? Don't waste my time, fool. Well, that is technically true. But that is also the best thing about adding something like this into the game. When it comes out, everyone's excited. Some of you may be pessimistic, just like I just said then. It's like, I don't want to waste my time with that shit. No one knows where they are. But it's the fact that it's something new, and people get to kind of find out where these enemies spawn, how to spawn them, and you can kind of experiment to find out the best things. What do these monsters drop, kind of stuff. It's nice, new, fresh stuff to bring into the game. I mean, if you get something like that and everyone's working together on, let's say, RuneScape Wiki or RuneHQ or whatever other, like Zybez and all that, everyone will come together in a massive group, and it should bring up a better community, I think. Because the community now is pretty much, I'm going to solo, fuck you all. So yeah, it should be a laugh, I think. But then you may be thinking the fact that actually people might not actually share this, and maybe they find a niche in the market that no one's even heard of this NM before, and they'll just hoard the NM to themselves. Well, I kind of know that this may possibly happen, but to combat that, it'll have a very specific drop table, which I'll go into a bit later, and I'll talk about different drops and stuff they can do. But I did kind of think of a solution to this. Eventually the RS community, that is you guys and everyone else playing RuneScape, will end up discovering all the Notorious monsters within the game, or possibly you may even find that maybe 1 or 2 Notorious monsters haven't actually been found yet. Now, to add some awesomeness to this, I think Jagex could then put like a, I don't know, a counter within the game or on the forums or on the website just to show how many NMs are found or how many are left to be discovered. They can even add like the Foundry high scores table, I guess. So the name of the very first person who killed X Notorious monster, you can go down a little Hall of Fame kind of thing. I think that would be pretty interesting. I mean, you could mix it up then, who's got the quickest kill, etc., using different kind of combat. I think it'd be pretty awesome. But anyway, moving on, the next kind of spawning method is going to be timed spawns. So, different from the killing, you can literally not have to kill any monsters whatsoever, and you can just walk up, kill the NM, and walk off. So this kind of NM will only spawn after a certain period of time has passed. This timer will actually be reset upon game updates and shutdowns, and these Notorious monsters in particular can vary between their spawning times. So you can have an NM, let's say a fairly low level one, or one which doesn't necessarily have amazing drops but has a useful drop nonetheless. That could spawn every 2 hours on the dot every single time in the exact same spot. What this would mean is, obviously, depending on how useful the drops are, you could have quite a lot of people just waiting in a certain area for it to spawn, as long as they know what the timers are for it. But then you could also have ones which take 20 hours to spawn, 10 hours to spawn, 48 hours to spawn, 72 hours to spawn. Or hell, even an entire week. What this means is you could have one spawn which would be, I don't know, let's say in the wilderness, and it's got a 72-hour spawn or something ridiculous like that, but this monster drops the new level 95 gear. Or something, you know what I mean? It's like something like that, 72 hours you have to wait for it, or it could be 98 hours, or 114 hours. But there's even better stuff for the big badass NMs, which I'll get into later on, which I have thought up and I think would be pretty awesome. But yeah, these timed spawns would be kind of in off the track places. So places such as like the Mauritania swamps, or down near the Chompy bird hunting, or maybe even inside the waste dungeons. I don't know anyone who's actually gone inside the waste dungeons after completing the quest. I never see anyone walk in there. So yeah, places like that, not places you typically go, where you may end up just walking around, and as you're going through the quest you may even run into the Notorious monster itself. I mean, stuff like that would be pretty awesome, I think. And obviously because of this, some Notorious monsters may only be available after completing certain quests, such as gaining access to the Elflands. So that takes a few quests. You may have to complete them to get to the area to maybe get the NM you're after, which I think would be pretty wicked. Now here is the other idea, which kind of expands into like the mega bosses with amazing drops and stuff like that. This is forced spawns. So the idea behind this is slightly different from the timed and the killing, but also linked with both. So around the world of RS, let's say there would be specific points or nodes. They might be glowing balls or obelisks or whatever you want, or whatever you can possibly think of. And once you go to these nodes, if you use a particular item on them, an NM will spawn to fight you, and it'll be targeting you. To get these special items, which you would need to spawn these mega Notorious monsters, you'd need to kill certain monsters of the same family, or even bosses, hell, even other Notorious monsters. So what I mean by this is, let's say there's a forced spawn and it's just south of Varrock, but to get to that forced spawn you need a goblin insignia. Well, you can only get these goblin insignias maybe by killing goblins in Goblin Village, or maybe you can get it by killing the goblin Notorious monsters, or maybe you can only get it from killing Bandos. So yeah, it's not really specific to a certain thing, but it could get massive pretty big. I mean, if you had to kill Nex to get a special insignia, imagine the NM you'd spawn to fight. But yeah, you can also, well, you can force spawn other NM to get another specific item, like I just said, but to make things different, you could go on like a chain Notorious monster hunt, which would be go into the goblins, then go into a timed goblin to get a second insignia, then go into a different location to kill goblins to get 3 different goblin insignias, which would then allow you to spawn a kingly Notorious monster. And what I mean by kingly, you would find like the best or highest ranked like goblin ever. You would have to fight that, so Bandos unrestricted, pure fight of death, which you would need like a group for. But yeah, you can also get hints to what special items you need to spawn, because obviously if you've got all these insignias and nodes all over the place, no one's going to know which points to which, so you could examine the nodes or the insignia and it'll show you the location. The way they can do that is, if you think of the elite clues, you've got the location finder thing where it kind of points an arrow in a certain direction, you've got to head over there. You could find it like that. So those are some of kind of the spawning systems I thought of. Obviously not all of them are fully thought out, but you get the general idea of potential that could be added. You could also get a bit creative and add even stranger requirements for it, such as having over a specific amount of kills of X monster and X NMs. Hell, Jagex could even add a Monster Slayer encyclopedia to the tab that basically isn't being used, the Combat Academy tab, the thing that's useless. And within that Monster Encyclopedia, it could show you every single name of every single Notorious monster, and after you've completed, or they could split it up into sections, so you've got like the level 1 to 10 section of Notorious monsters, and obviously keep going up until 200. And you could use them to hunt them, and once you complete each section, you gain a special item. It could be kind of like a fancy item, like a cape to show off how well you're doing kind of thing. And then that would add to people who love slaying, and have completed Slayer and maybe want a bit more challenge now, which typically become bosses. But yeah, it could go into that slot, which basically just isn't being used, and become a main part of playing the game. Kind of like a side quest, a bit like a skill, but not a skill at the same time, if you get my meaning. Mostly a distractions and diversions, so you can do it whenever the hell you feel like. You don't necessarily have to go out hunting, but they're nonetheless. So, with that said, we've pretty much covered Notorious monsters by kill spawning, time spawning, and force spawning. Also covered KNMs, or the Kingly Notorious monsters. But I don't particularly want to end it there, so let's move on to, I don't know, maybe Godly Notorious monsters, or Void Notorious monsters. So what do I mean by GNM or VNM? Godly Notorious monster or Void Notorious monster? Well, recently Jagex added the World's Wake quest, which, if you haven't completed yet, spoilers. If you have completed it, then you'll understand what I mean. You kind of become a demigod when you complete the quest, and you move into the new age of RuneScape. But what if, while Guthix was protecting the world, and fighting all the gods, and making his little safe haven in the centre of the world, and setting up a force field of some sorts or other, he or his followers happened to capture all these legendary godlike or devil-like mega monster bosses that Saradomin and whatnot have been controlling, or maybe stuff we've never even heard of before. Sounds a bit interesting? Yeah. So, well, thanks to your new awesome demigod status and the fact that you've completed one of the, well, meant to be one of the hardest quests in the game, and you're now the current stand-in for Guthix, let's say maybe his followers tell you about them, and maybe they've kept these monsters in a prison of some kind, and maybe after you've done that Notorious monster hunting book, encyclopedia, you may get access to them. And now you could take on the, basically, world killers. So, how would these actually work? Well, as you all know, Jagex has shard servers, which basically allows for instance dungeons and boss battles, much like Dungeoneering, the Queen Black Dragon and Kelphite King, and recently the God Wars dungeon. Well, these would be kind of similar. They'd require a group of people for obvious reasons, as well as some very special hard to obtain items gained via killing bosses and different kinds of NMs are like. They'd obviously be top tier, as to get to the mega bosses you obviously need some decent stuff to actually start to begin with. So these guys would have special attacks or sequences of attacks like the Calvert King, QBD, and a lot of the dungeoneering bosses, as well as kind of like the special attacks they've now got in the God Wars hard mode. Things like that, including the fact that they're going to have a fucking shit ton of health and defense, and they will hit like a truck to make things even more interesting. Now, in order not to make these immensely impossible to kill by giving them something ridiculous like 10 bajillion HP, if you ramp their defense up, like most of the demon bosses in dungeoneering, the ones where when you start the fight they got low defense, but then eventually that little meter fills up and suddenly they're untouchable. If you give them defense like that, so not necessarily giving them loads of life as I said, but just increasing their defense ridiculously, that basically makes them low-lifed, hard-hitting, and very dodgeable. So they become impossible to hit, or you do very little damage to it, but their life is very little to begin with. It makes it a lot more interesting. It becomes kind of like a down-to-the-wire fight. I mean, either one of you could take a big hit and be done with kind of stuff. But that doesn't mean to say there won't be a boss with 10 million HP. So let's say there's a boss, one of these void NMs, has got 10 million HP, but such a boss to basically deal enough damage before everyone dies takes like 50 people to take on, or 20 people to take on. His attacks would be fairly hard hitting, but nothing like noteworthy, nothing mega scary. But it would be kind of a race against you running out of food or the boss running out of HP. Yeah, so that would be pretty interesting. I mean, if you add poison or the bleed effects from weapons and stuff, and then just throw people at it because its damage isn't massive, it would be pretty interesting. I mean, could you imagine taking on something with that much life? It would be pretty cool. So you could access these VNMs or GNMs via the dungeon slash tower slash little home Guthix has in the World Wakes quest, and you'd have like Juna there maybe, or another, such as the Tortoise. Either way, well, that is pretty much the Notorious monsters, Kingly Notorious monsters, Void Notorious monsters, and Godly Notorious monsters. That's pretty much what I've come up with at the moment. Basically explained how they spawn, how you can actually do it and kind of work out, and how it would be implemented via, I guess, lore-friendly means with the VNMs and GNMs. So, on to the main thing that you're probably thinking of is, what the hell would these guys drop? Well, this took a bit of thinking of, because there's quite a lot of stuff in the game at the moment, and obviously, if you add stuff that's kind of meh, it'll make people think, well, there's no point killing it because what you get from it is meh. So yeah. Well, to start with, everything they drop will be exclusive to the person who killed it. So what I mean by that is, you cannot trade or sell those items, except some certain items they drop, such as pop items, the items you'd use to spawn other Notorious monsters, for example. So why would that be exclusive, and why would only certain items be done? Well, if the items weren't exclusive, and this was just added, you'd have people instantly go into the high-level Notorious monsters with all the best gear, and basically not telling anyone about it. And then they could just simply monopolise the living shit out of it, and they'd make a bajillion quid, and then they'd just be millionaires, and that would obliterate the economy into nothing. And there'd be fuck all left. If you think Torva and all of that is expensive at the moment, if they could monopolise the new gear, which could potentially be the new level 99 mega weapons, for example, it would just annihilate the economy. Those weapons would be worth a max stack, kind of thing, because no one knows about it other than these specific people. So yeah, that kind of fixes that, and kind of makes people think, ah well, may as well tell people about it, I've got everything I need from X boss. So, that basically means that lower levels and non-bossing new players would never be able to afford it, simply because people would monopolise it, and the rich boss hunters would get immensely rich and basically fuck the economy in the ass. So now that we know why most items will be exclusive, similar to like Dragon Defenders, because they're exclusive to each person, what exactly are these fellas, these now brand new Notorious monsters, gonna drop for us? Well, it would be everything you can possibly equip. So your helm, ring, belts, gloves, boots, plate, bottom, weapons, pets, capes, summonable pets, cash, just straight up cash, skilling materials, skilling boosts, attack boosts, special pots, whatever you can possibly think of, pretty much. I mean, you can just vary the living shit out of what they can possibly drop. But what stats and stuff would these actual items have? Well, this bit is quite a lot harder to kind of work out due to the way RuneScape's system is set up, as they don't really have any variance between weapons at all whatsoever. I mean, if you buy a dragon weapon, doesn't matter, the only difference is how quick it hits. But then the damage equals out to the same no matter which weapon you pick. So yeah, this bit is quite a lot harder to work out. But if we go back to our little goblin Notorious monster friend, he's level 10, and you'd need to be like level 15 possibly to kill him safely. Well, he would drop new gear that can't be traded. It would have stats, let's say for example between black and mithril. Now to make things a little more interesting, if you can get sets of these special armors, you can gain set effects. For the black and mithril, for example, perhaps a small health regen effect, such as gaining, let's say 20-30 health per tick, which is quite a massive amount. Or maybe another NM at the level 150 mark, for example, might drop a weapon with the special effect of slowing enemy attacks, or maybe even preventing movement for half a second every single hit, or maybe a quarter of a second, or stuns it for half a second. You get the idea. There's a lot of variance, because basically right now every single weapon has no variance whatsoever. So to mix things up with these exclusive items you can only get by killing Notorious monsters, you could add effects to them, because they're not buyable. The only way to get them is if you actually go out and get them yourself. So it may not necessarily be anything massive, it could be just small effects. So you might have one weapon that gives you +1 strength, maybe one weapon, let's say the one black halberd. You can get a rune halberd, for example. Let's put that into it. A rune halley. You could kill this dude, get a rune halley. The difference is you can kill this one, and the rune halley may have a 2% critical strike chance, or you could get a rune halley and maybe it would have +2 strength. Or maybe you can get a halley with a tiny bit of extra damage, or a special effect on it, like the slowdown or stunning. So it's very small things like that. They don't impact a lot, but they impact enough to make them better than just simply buying normal stuff. Obviously this works better at high levels because it takes that much longer to get between levels. So the low level NMs, for example, may not necessarily drop mega armor, because they'll simply become redundant too quick for it to actually matter about getting. So the lower ones might drop skilling stuff, so to help the lower levels get up that much quicker, get their skills up to like the 50-70 mark, something like that. But to make things a bit more interesting, it's not just going to be simple weapons and simple armors and stuff like that. You could also add other options such as hybrid armor parts, which they've just spoke about in the God Wars dungeon update. They do plan to add these kind of things in. So for these parts, you get them from NMs, which would be like hybrid weapons, or summonable pets, which you can use via the dressing booth thing that you get the Sky Scorcher, is it? Those kind of things. You can get different variations of them, maybe some that actually permanently help you. It's kind of like the summoning skill itself, except for they do a lot less damage, but it's kind of like a convenience thing. So, other than that, you could have other little summonable pets which will maybe pick up food for you, or even, like I said, attacking in the fight. Honestly, these things could drop. The things they could drop is just endless. You could go on and on about just adding a little bit here, changing a little bit here, adding something brand new. So let's say, for example, a weapon of equivalent level, such as killing the Abbey demons and a Notorious monster, will give you a whip. Yeah, no surprise there, Abbey demons drop whips. But the whip from the Notorious monster will allow you to put gems inside it, for example. and different gems add different effects. Others could possibly drop scrimshaws, because the only way to get scrimshaws right now is player-owned ports, and the only people who can do player-owned ports is people with 90+ skills. So we could add something new for the lower levels to actually use, because it is in the game right now, although not a lot of people use scrimshaws, simply for the fact that gathering the materials to make them and the short period of time they last kind of makes them meh. But this would basically fill in holes of armor upgrades and alternative armor upgrades and kind of holes in equipment in general. So you could put more use into what emeralds do, rubies do, diamonds do, sapphires do, dragonstones, onyx. You can kind of add new stuff you would use that for, rather than just, I'm going to spam the crap out of making, I don't know, gold rings, or I'm just going to cut all these uncut gems for crafting XP. You could add something to it which would actually make it useful. But this would also make stuff possible for people who don't necessarily have the cash or the ability to group up with a large group of mates or clans to take out big bosses, and it'll also give them the ability to get some armor and weapons for themselves for a fraction of the cost. So, like God Wars weapons, CLS, save you some time maybe, and the Drygores, you might have a less effective version of the Drygores which you could solo, rather than needing to group up with people. Obviously you couldn't sell these versions of it, but it gives people the chance to get it. Another little thing they could add is also, I suppose, a secondary currency would be the best way to put it. You can call it whatever you want. I'm going to say ancient coin for now, because why not? They could have something like ancient coins, and with these ancient coins you could trade them with, I'm going to say, a goblin NPC who likes to scrounge up old stuff, because goblins like that apparently. But yeah, you could have a little goblin fella and he'll do that, and you could trade him. But let's say some of the godly NMs, or the VNMs, the big badass Notorious monsters, have got a chance to drop a level 1 weapon. Now you're probably thinking, why the hell are they dropping a level 1 weapon if they're the best monsters in the game? Well, these weapons are going to act slightly different compared to usual. There's a couple of ways you can do this, which I'm thinking of, and they'd technically be the level 99 weapons. You could level them up in stages, which would require gathering this ancient coin. So it may take 20 of these ancient coins to begin with to level it up one section, which would bump it up to a level 50 weapon. Then it might take 100 of a second kind of ancient coin to get it up to 100, and then a third, and then a fourth, and when it's at the 4th stage it's a level 99 weapon, which has got a bajillion fucking effects on it and makes it godlike. But obviously, because of the godlikeness of it, it would be rare as shit. To put it nicely, or easy I should say. But yeah, there's a bunch of stuff you could do. You could have low level Notorious monsters, for example, like the goblin fella right at the very beginning in Lumbridge. He could drop a level 5 item, and it may be a dagger or something, or a sword, or a bow, or whatever the hell you feel like. But the idea is, it would start at level 5, and every time your combat level increases, it increases the power of the weapon slightly. Obviously these would be to scale with your typical weapon, but because of, I suppose, the easiness of it, you would never have to change your weapon. The base damage on it would be less than the actual weapon of that level. So what I mean by that is, let's say at level 70 you've got an Abyssal Whip, and the whip's base damage is 1000 for sake of easiness and argument. Well, this like self-leveling up weapon might have a strength of 900 or 800. So it's still better than the preceding weapon, but it's not as good as simply buying the weapon of that level. And it may only go up to a certain level cap, so you might be able to get it at level 5 from the level 5 Notorious monster, but eventually it'll hit level 50, and at that point it no longer levels itself up. To give a good example of this, they did add them in, I think it's the Solomon Store. It was those lava whip things, which self-leveled. I don't know how many of you actually remember them, but they have had something like this in the game before. This is kind of where I got my idea from, plus from other MMOs. But yeah, they could add these weapons and items and stuff to the game, which I think personally would make the game a hell of a lot more interesting, and would allow people to kind of guess stuff on their own without having to mess about earning money all the time, and money is no longer the top priority. You must have money or you're fucked. Because I mean, how many people, once they hit the level to be able to wear the next gear, actually have enough money by that time to wear next gear? Yeah, there's not that many. People have to work at it, going bossing and stuff, and with God Wars being typically packed, although now you do have instanced, yeah, making money isn't exactly an easy thing to do anymore, unless you go for the big bosses, which you need friends to help you with, unless you are incredibly lucky or have some kind of unknown glitch I don't know about. But yeah, you get the idea pretty much. It would basically allow for people to do and gather gear 4 level without the massive cost. Obviously they're not going to be as powerful, but it won't cost you 700 mil. Yeah, so there we go. That's pretty much it. That is kind of my RS theory on being able to add Notorious monsters and everything that comes with that. Hopefully this made sense. This is the first kind of video of its kind I've done, which I think is fairly interesting, which is why I thought I want to show it to you guys and see what you lot think. So, I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you've got some input of your own, maybe add in something in that I didn't mention or didn't even think of, because this is put together with a couple of people in mind. It's not just a one-man army kind of thing. I have had information chucked to me and kind of added in. I'd be very much interested in what you guys think. If you've got any ideas to add to it, what should be taken out, what things you don't like, what things you do like. A bit of constructive criticism, like, because I would like to eventually chuck stuff like this onto the forums as a potential update maybe, because I think some of the ideas we could come up with as the RuneScape community would be pretty fucking awesome. I mean, there's a hell of a lot of us and we are wicked. So there we go. With that said, if you do like this kind of video, or if you really like this video and you'd like to see some more of this and maybe similar-ish to this, then please like this video and leave me a comment. If I get comments and the video is liked a lot, it lets me know that you guys want to see more of this kind of video, because these videos are fairly good to do. They're nice and easy, but I can get together with mates and we can talk about this. I can talk about with you guys, the subscribers on the friends chat, all in the clan, and there's a good laugh. I mean, these things are interesting to listen to, even if they are at the bollocks and may never come to light. But yeah, it's interesting to think about nonetheless, yeah? Well, hopefully you guys thought the same, because I did, hence the video. But there we go. So leave us a like and comment if you really like this, and hopefully we can get another one up. And other than that, I think that's pretty much it. So let me know what you think. Got any constructive criticism? I'd like to hear about it. I'd like to know what you guys think of this in particular. Would you like more RS theories? If so, I will catch you all later. Have a good one.